CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says 2 million people will lose their benefits. These aren't targeted at people who somehow abuse the system. These are just 2 million people lose their benefits, 200,000 kids off the free breakfast and lunch. That's wrong. Let him go next on United.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman, Mr. Ribble. 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Chairman, Chairman Lucas, for yielding here. SNAP is an incredibly important program in the United States. I don't think there's anybody that I've met on my side of the aisle or on theirs, and I particularly appreciate Mr. Govern's position on the fact that we need to make sure that hungry children in this country get food to eat. We want them to have good, healthy meals. However, the data doesn't support, on behalf of the taxpayer, that we continue to increase funding for SNAP. And in fact, if you follow the red line here, that's unemployment in America. And you see during the recession, unemployment went up, as did SNAP spending, almost exactly at the same ratio. And then when unemployment, as the economy began to recover, and unemployment went down, as did poverty went down, SNAP funding continued to go up. And in fact, in 2008 to 2011, SNAP funding went up 119%, while poverty went up only 16%. Between 2010 and 2011, poverty actually went down, while SNAP spending went up. It's not just an either-or, Mr. Chairman, that we can either provide food for the poor or charge the taxpayer money. We need to do both, but as fiduciaries of the taxpayers' dollars, we must do it reasonably. We don't want any child to go without food. But we recognize that the economy has begun to recover since 2009, where we were spending only $53 billion on SNAP, if only is the appropriate word. Today we're going to be spending $82 billion on SNAP. Unemployment went from 10.2% in 2009 down to 7.6% today. Under this basis, I wonder at what point could we ever have SNAP go down. Now here's the reality. We keep talking about $20 billion. In fact, next year, with a $2 billion cut annually, we won't even roll SNAP back effectively 1 year, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, a member of the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Schrader.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I believe strongly that we've got a debt deficit problem. I think most Americans agree with that. But I don't think most Americans would agree that we balance our deficit on the backs of the most vulnerable people out there, particularly the children. As was alluded to a moment ago by my good friend from Wisconsin, half of the people on food stamps are children. Children. They didn't get a job. They're still hungry. The other point I think is well known by Americans that while unemployment may have gone down, there's a lot of underemployed people. And there's a lot of people that have given up searching for work because the recession lingers. The real world is that the SNAP program is a lagging indicator. People struggle. They try and keep their job. They go into savings. They rely on friends. And then after several years, they lose their house. Maybe they've already lost their job. And then they need food stamps. I think it's egregious that we would deny them that. Now, there may be some inefficiencies in the program. We've been working on that for years. There's an error rate in my home state of Oregon that we're proud to say we've driven down. We were guilty of not overseeing the program. That's been driven down. We should be rewarding good behavior, not penalizing it at the end of the day. I still have over 20% of my folks in Oregon, they're on food stamps. And that has not changed. And that's not because they're glad to be on food stamps. My folks want a job. They want to be able to feed their own families. But the real world is this was a horrible recession, the worst recession since the Great Depression. And you don't balance that budget on the backs of these kids. If we had had a chance to vote on another food stamp bill that may have gotten down to the Senate levels of reductions, I think you wouldn't see some folks here worried about it. But this is the only game in town at trying to protect vulnerable Americans. There's other ways to cut the program. The direct payments that we did in the Ag Committee, that's the way to go about it, not with the most vulnerable population. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the changes made to SNAP are directed at reducing fraud, not at those in true need. And affecting the inefficiencies that have been dealing with for years, we have the chance to affect those inefficiencies right now in this year's Farm Bill, not 5 years from now. Without the changes proposed by this committee and made with bipartisan support, Congress tells the American people that taxpayers should support fraudulent payments. Are we seriously debating a 2% reduction that centers on fraud elimination and ensuring those that we actually, instead ensuring those that we actually want to help qualify? This Farm Bill eliminates advertising for food stamps, eliminates recruitment, bonuses, and payments to lottery winners, all of which divert funds away from the program's actual goal. Any individual can apply or reapply by simply meeting the income and asset requirements. These are simple common sense reforms that save taxpayers billions and continue to protect those truly in need. I ask my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I ask unanimous consent to insert on the record CBO's statement that shows SNAP, the number of people on SNAP going from 47 million to 34 million over the next 10 years.
The gentleman's request is covered by General Lee.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished Democratic leader, Ms. Pelosi.
General Lady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, but more importantly, I thank him for his outstanding leadership for helping us live the Bible here in the Congress. He has been a relentless, dissatisfied, persistent champion for feeding the hungry in America and throughout the world. He is the living example, a personification of the Gospel of Matthew. And I appreciate your comments that you made earlier about priorities and the least of our brethren. I thank you, Mr. McGovern, for your leadership day in and day out as chair of the task force on hunger and working with Congresswoman DeLauro as an appropriator who shares your value on this subject. You've both been magnificent. And I thank you as a mom, because we all have our motivation for going into politics or deciding that we're going to run for office, and my motivation can be described in 3 words: the children, the children, the children. As a mother of 5 myself and as a grandmother, I know how children thrive when they have the attention, the love, the food, the care that they need. And it always is a wonderment to me that in this, the greatest country that ever existed in the history of the world, that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 children goes to sleep hungry at night. And so it's another wonderment to me why we would even have to have this conversation on the floor of the House as to whether we as a nation are prepared to feed our children. We're all familiar with the comment, from the mouths of babes. From the mouths of babes. It's usually followed with, sometimes, come gems. In this case, from the mouths of babes comes food. Food to live, to be sustained, to be healthy, food to study and do well in school, food to have respect in their family and with their friends and all the rest. What's really interesting about it, though, for all the sentiment that is involved about feeding the children of our country, it makes economic sense to do so as well. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says that rate increases of SNAP benefits is one of the 2 best options to boost growth and jobs in a weak economy. For every dollar invested in the SNAP program, for every dollar invested in that initiative, $1.70 is injected into the economy for economic activity. This purchasing power given to families who will spend it immediately because this is a necessity, this purchasing power injects demand into the economy, creating jobs. Don't take it from me. The Congressional Budget Office says this is one of the 2 best ways to boost growth. Another economic aspect of this is that, as has been said over and over again, nearly 20 million children, nearly 20 million children are the beneficiaries of food stamps. And why do those families need food stamps? Well, some of them are families that are making the minimum wage. In fact, if you are a family of 4 and you have 2 wage earners, Mr. Chairman, the income you make from 2 wage earners making the minimum wage still has you below the poverty line and eligible for food stamps. 2 wage earners making the minimum wage cannot afford to put food on the table, hence they qualify for food stamps. These food stamps in some ways are subsidizing an unfair minimum, too low minimum wage in our country. So, speaking of the children, I hope that one of the other things we will do here is to raise the minimum wage, because that is the decent thing to do. But many of the same people who want to cut food stamps, in fact 2 million families out of food stamps, are just the same people who are opposed to increasing the minimum wage. So it's a question of fairness. It's a question of decency. It's a question of respect for all of God's children. It's also a question of doing the right thing not only for the children, but for our economy. $1.70 of economic growth injected for every dollar spent on food stamps. Now, to cut food stamps and therefore reduce that economic growth might be considered one of the least smart ideas that you will hear here. But there is so much competition for that designation that it just fits comfortably among initiatives to suppress the wages and to cut food stamps. It's all part of a package, and it is not a pretty sight. That's why, Mr. McGovern, your relentless, persistent, dissatisfied advocacy is such a beautiful thing in this arena where people think it's take very lightly cutting 2 million people off of food stamps. I urge our colleagues to support the McGovern amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The lady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to the gentleman's amendment. The Ag Committee has worked diligently in a bipartisan manner to craft these reforms to the food stamp program that this amendment would strip out totally. The argument that there's somehow we can food stamp our way into a great economy is a bit false, in the sense that it doesn't reflect that we're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we're putting into the food program. The families that the previous speaker spoke at will still remain on food stamps. If you qualify on the income and the asset side, you'll stay on the program. If you make too much money to qualify directly for food stamp, those are the folks that we'll be getting at as part of the $20 billion that we'll save in this program. It's a 2% reduction. I'm hard-pressed to understand that we could have a near 5% reduction in the beneficiaries by cutting only 2% of the spending. We'll trim it from $80 billion a year to $78 billion a year. Much of the conversation you'll hear in justification for not going along with these reforms would sound like we're gutting and destroying the entire program. We are not. These are modest reforms that we believe are appropriate at this time, and I urge my colleagues to vote against the McGovern amendment and support what the Bipartisan Committee on Agriculture did.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to a great leader on this issue, the gentlelady from California. I want to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, who's been a champion on this issue, and proud that she's here.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Let me thank Congressman McGovern for yielding, but also for your tremendous leadership, not only in preserving our safety net, but your tireless work to eliminate hunger, which really should be an oxymoron in America. I'm a proud co-sponsor and rise in strong support of this amendment to safeguard hungry children and families across America. Mr. Chairman, this farm bill would make heartless and harmful cuts to our nation's frontline defense against hunger, the SNAP program. Oftentimes, people need a safety net, a bridge over troubled waters to help them through difficult economic times. And yet these huge cuts come even while they preserve wasteful subsidies for huge agribusiness who really don't need corporate subsidies to continue with their huge profits. Taking away food from hungry children hurts their health, their educational outcome, and restricts their economic prospects for their entire adult lives. And the federal government will end up paying more for their health care and their education and get less revenue from their taxes. As a former food stamp recipient, I know for a fact no one wants to be on food stamps. People want to work.
Oklahoma is recognized.
People want to work. May I have
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman.
I yield the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Dr. Yoho.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. Mr. Speaker, I stand in opposition to Mr. McGovern's amendment because the amount removed from the food stamps program will not remove 1 calorie off of anyone's plate that deserves it or requires this assistance. And I know the importance personally of having to go on food stamps. When my wife and I first got married, we were 19 and a half. The economy was the interest rates in the economy went to 20%. And we had to get on food stamps for a short period of time. So I understand the need for those. But yet, let's look at the facts here. Out of the whole bill of $940 billion being spent over 10 years we're looking at here, 80% of that goes to this food stamp program, which is approximately $752 billion. 80% of the farm bill is going to that. Only 20% is actually going to the farmers. And we've cut that drastically over the last couple years. And so this is just a common sense approach of reducing the amount of money that we're spending in this country. And I stand in opposition of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. DeLauro, can I, after, that's fine.
Let me just say to my colleague a few minutes ago who was up on this floor and talking against the food stamp program and against the McGovern amendment, I think it's important to note this is not my making this up, but this is an individual who has received almost $4.7 million in farm subsidies since 1995, including nearly $1.2 million in direct payments. Now, I don't know whether that is a program that is means-tested, that's asset-tested, and that has a cap on it. No, this is free money for people who serve in this body. And these are the same folks who want to cut the food stamp program. I rise in strong support of this amendment to replace those deep cuts to the food stamp program, which is our nation's most important anti-hunger program. All across the country, cities, suburbs, rural communities, from the coast to the heartland, nearly 50 million Americans are struggling with hunger, and almost 20 million of them are our children. No part of the country is immune. We should not destroy what has been a long-standing bipartisan tradition to give crucial nutrition assistance. This is what this farm bill does. It cuts out the nutrition program for 2 million people, 1 million of whom are children. And the research has shown us that the food stamp program is the most effective program pushing against the steep rise in poverty. 99% of recipients live under the poverty line. They're not getting $4.7 million in subsidies from the federal government. You want to talk about the food stamp program, by the way, when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, this is a program with a 3.8%
60% error rate. I defy you to go to any other agency of the federal government and find that they have as low an error rate. You want to talk about a program that is really ought to be challenged in this farm bill? Let's take a look at the crop insurance program.
Time has expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma is
Look at the
recognized.
crop insurance program. 60% U.S. taxpayers pick up the cost.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Support the McGovern amendment.
Can I inquire about how much time remains on both sides on this amendment?
The gentleman from Oklahoma has 3 minutes. The gentleman from Massachusetts has 1 minute.
That being the case, Mr. Chairman, I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Chairman.
Recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's worth noting that when the Ag Committee put this bill together, a bill which had bipartisan support, overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle in the process, we understood that reform had to be achieved across the board. We have reforms in the commodity title. The direct payment program goes away. We have reforms in the conservation program. $6 billion worth of savings through reforms. And yes, we address the nutrition title. We tried in good faith to pick programs that would not, in the eyes of the committee as a whole, create huge hardship on citizens. How did we do that? Well, categorical eligibility. If you receive some other federal welfare benefit under present law, you automatically get food stamps. We simply say you have to apply. Demonstrate your income, demonstrate your assets. If you qualify, we help you. But you gotta prove you qualify. Now, some may argue about what those assets and income levels are, but that's not the debate today. It's automatic food stamps. Something called LIHEAP, where a number of states use the flexibility of the 96 law to say, we'll help you with your home heating, and then you can automatically qualify for food stamps. There are actually some states that send out $1 to qualify for a free month's worth of automatic food stamps. We simply say in the bill, states, if you want to do this, power to you, but put $20 a month out, buy more than just a cup or a pint of home heating oil, actually put something out. That saves about $8 billion. We tried very hard to come up with ways that would not deny the needy the help they need, but by the same token make sure those who qualified got the help. That's only fair to the recipients who need help. It's only fair to their fellow citizens who pay for that help. We tried in the best way we could to achieve reform and to help those who need the help. Now, will these CBO numbers be in fruition when it's all calculated? I suspect a number of people who receive automatic food stamps will be eligible. They'll fill out the paperwork. They'll demonstrate the need. They'll qualify. But I can only work with the CBO numbers that are given to me under the rules of the House. And the rules say these two changes save $20.5 billion. Half of the approximate $40 billion we save out of the overall farm bill. It's tough economic times. It's a challenging federal budget. We're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to do it in the most difficult of circumstances. I respect my friends, my colleagues. We just happen to disagree about how the policy will work. I sincerely believe the perspective I've offered is accurate. If my friends are accurate and I'm wrong, then we'll address this issue sometime in the very near future. If I'm right, then the people who need help will continue to get help. The Treasury will have $20-some billion of the $40 billion package to spend in other places. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have 1 minute. Is that what I have left?
Gentleman's correct.
All right. I yield myself the balance of the time. Mr. Chairman, because of prior cuts in the program already, even if we do nothing in terms of this farm bill, in terms of reducing SNAP, a family of three, on average, would lose about $30 a month in SNAP benefits. That's if we do nothing. They're already going to receive a reduction come November. Then on top of that is what we have in this farm bill. CBO says that 2 million people will be thrown off the benefit. They say that over 200,000 kids will lose their free breakfast and lunch at school. I have great respect for Chairman Lucas. I wanted very much to support a bill that he put together, but to me this cut is too big and is too harsh and is going to hurt too many people. all of us came here to help people. We all came here to help our constituents, rich and poor alike. But this here will hurt people. And that is why I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. This cut is too big. It is too harsh. We don't need to do this. We don't have, the price for a farm bill should not be to make more hungry, to result in more hunger in America. We can do so much better. Our country is better than this. So I urge all my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, to come together, support this amendment. Let's not make hunger worse in America.
The question is on the adoption of the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. If you favor the motion, say aye. If you oppose, say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
On that as for recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment are offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report Number 113-117, offered by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio.
Pursuant to the House Resolution 271, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer the Gibbs-Kind amendment to Title I of the Farm Bill that sets the target price for all crops at 55% of a 5-year rolling Olympic average and changes the acreage available for target price support to 85% of the farmer's base acres. Is this time I reserve?
Mr. Chairman?
Purpose.
Mr. Chairman, I seek to claim time in opposition.
You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Would you like me to use your friend for a couple minutes?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this time
Gentleman from Ohio.
At this time I yield 90 seconds to Representative Kine from the great state of Wisconsin.
Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank my friend from Ohio for yielding me this time, and I thought his summary was very accurate what our amendment would do. What Mr. Gibbs didn't point out, though, is this would also save $12 billion over 10 years by a more fiscally responsible approach, one that we feel is market-based, one we think is economically feasible, one that also maintains an important safety net for farmers if commodity prices do drop. But listen, the supporters of the price loss coverage program as currently drafted will claim the programs necessary to ensure farmers have a safety net for when the market collapses. But instead, the program in the Farm Bill before us sets target prices so high that some commodities are guaranteed an 8% profit. We don't guarantee any other business in the country that type of profit margin other than crop insurance companies that are guaranteed a 14% profit under this bill. And by setting the target prices for programs at this historically high level, it will all but ensure a much higher likelihood of government payouts in the future. In fact, implementation of the price loss coverage program will already require government payouts for the 5 top commodity crops. Rice alone would pay out $1,400 per hundred, while the current price is at $10.50 today. So it's outrageous that while we're cutting over $20 billion in the nutrition title of the Farm Bill, we're adding on this additional high target price with additional taxpayer subsidies in an area where it's not economically needed or feasible. And since farmers receive these payouts on their planted acres, what we're encouraging is to overplant and to plant marginal lands that probably wouldn't be brought into production anyway, because their losses will be covered and the profit margin will be assured. And also given the fact that we're still trying to work our way out of the WTO complaint from Brazil on the cotton subsidy program, this program sets up another potential WTO challenge. Mr. Chairman, I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of the time to myself.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'd like to talk a little bit. Back in the 1995 Farm Bill, Congress made a decision to move the programs to be more market-oriented, where farmers would plant towards the market and not towards the program. And as past State Farm Bureau president and also a farmer, you know, when I talk to my farmer colleagues, they want the check to come from the market and not the government. And my fear is, my concern is that the House bill will distort the market prices by setting the target prices, as Representative Kine said, too high. It is possible, let's take corn for example. We had a drought. We saw the prices scoot up to very high levels. Well, we're seeing some rainfall. Weather kind of moderates over and averages out over a several-year period. And it's possible we could see the prices of corn, for example, come down and drop below these very high set target rates, and farmers could still be profitable, still be making some money on a per bushel basis, depending on their yield. Yield has to be a factor. And when you have price loss coverage, yield is not factored in, where they could actually still be making some money on a per bushel basis per acre and still get a government payout. That's market distortion. And it's interesting to note that the organizations that support my amendment, the National Corn Growers, Soybean Association, many national organizations, and many state organizations that represent thousands of farmers out there, strongly support my amendment, as Representative Kine said, cuts $12 billion from the committee-marked bill. You find that kind of odd. It's because the reason is they don't want to go back to the previous policies of 1995, where we have market distortion and farmers are planning for the program and the market's not dictating it, and they never get out of that rut. Another concern I have is WTO concerns. When we change this to planted acres, direct benefits paid to planted acres, that's ripe for a WTO complaint and could for a trade war. And this will increase, I believe, overplanting, and the farmers are reacting for the wrong reasons and not the market reasons. So on that basis, Mr. Chairman, with the strong support of many of the national commodity organizations that represent thousands of farmers, strongly do not want this, and we can save taxpayers $12 billion and keep a market-oriented bill and not risk exposure to taxpayers if the markets collapse to more historical.
The gentleman yielded an additional 30 seconds.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman for his leadership on this issue. As a former past Farm Bureau president in the state of Ohio, and someone who's intimately familiar with these commodity programs, his lead has been crucial. He knows how the market works, and I think this program is setting up a lot of market distortions, unnecessary taxpayer subsidies that aren't economically justifiable. This is a way of providing the safety net in a fiscally responsible manner, and I hope we can continue working with the leadership of the committee to make this right. I yield back.
Thank you, and I think it is very important that we do have a safety net, but the safety net can't be at a level where prices are set at or close or even above the cost of production. That distorts markets. But we need a safety net to protect our American farmers and our rural communities and ensure that we have the safest and most affordable, continue to have the safest and affordable food supply in the world. Thank you.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I might consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
If Mr. Gibbs is willing, I'd like to request that he withdraw his amendment with my commitment that we would continue to work on these issues as we move forward to produce an equitable and market-oriented farm bill. And I would yield to the gentleman for any response he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that commitment, I will respectfully withdraw my amendment from consideration, and I look forward to working with you and the rest of the committee, and I yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman's time, and I yield back.
Amendments withdrawn. Pursuant to the order of the House of today, it is now in order to consider Amendment Number 55, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment Number 55, printed in House Report Number 113-117, offered by Ms. Herrera Butler of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Herrera Butler, is and a member of the opposed to the amendment. Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. I'm here today to join in the effort to promote this farm bill and request that my amendment be added to it. I'm here to protect millions of jobs across the country, millions, 110,000 in my home state of Washington alone, and by doing something we don't hear much of in this chamber, particularly on this side of the aisle. I'm here to say I agree with the EPA. With respect to treating forest roads, the EPA has it right and has now for nearly 40 years. This bipartisan amendment that I'm offering, I'm very proud to offer with my colleague Kurt Schrader, simply codifies the EPA's silviculture rule that says mud and rock runoff from forest roads should not be categorized the same as industrial parking lots or factories. It makes no changes to the Clean Water Act, nor does it restrict the EPA from enforcing current law. In the recent Ninth Circuit Court decision, a judge, not the EPA, decided this rule needed to be changed and directed the EPA to require NPDES permits for all forest roads on public or private land. This ruling would have cost private, federal, and state and tribal landowners billions of dollars, and it would have helped kill thousands of jobs across the country. Fortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately overturned this outrageous ruling and also believes the EPA's treatment of forest roads is the proper approach. However, extremist lawsuits continue to roll in, and all of them are threatening the viability of forests by potentially costing private and public landowners millions in unnecessary, unscientifically proven expenses. Mr. Chairman, unless Congress acts, our forests will remain under the attack of baseless lawsuits that simply serve no purpose in protecting our rivers, streams, waterways, but are highly effective in killing real jobs. We're talking about jobs in wood product manufacturing, pulp, paper, forest harvesting, forest management, and the list goes on. This provision enjoys a wide range of bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. I urge my colleagues to stand with private landowners, job creators, Republicans and Democrats in Congress, the administration, the Supreme Court in supporting this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves of time. For our purposes, gentleman from Oregon.
I claim the time in opposition, although I am in support of the bill or the amendment.
Without objection.
Yield myself as much time as I may consume then.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill that's long overdue. I join in support of my colleague and friend from Washington State to lend a little rationality to the discussion about how we operate in our forests. This legislation hopefully would not be necessary. As the gentlewoman alluded to, we've had a Supreme Court decision that would seem to indicate that the EPA rule for the last 37 years has been a good rule. Indeed, agriculture, forestry are classically non-point source polluters. They are not a factory. They are not a municipality's sewer system. They are non-point source polluter or emitters, if you will. And I think that's the way to look at this. When you have a decision by the Supreme Court, I think it's time to hopefully verify that decision. The concern I have, and the reason why this legislation is necessary, is that while it agreed that the rule should stand, it did not really rule on the merits of the issue. And we're already facing additional lawsuits from different organizations that have a misguided view of what actually goes on in the forest system. And I find it particularly egregious that when there's a great concern about forest runoff, agricultural runoff into our streams and our rivers, that when the industry steps up and does the right thing by pushing culverts, making the roads safer and cleaner, dumping that stuff onto the forest floor, not in the river, that they get sued and asked to come up with additional permits that would cost jobs and not help us get out of this great recession. So I am a strong proponent of this bill. I think it will get overwhelming support in this great august body, and look forward to bringing it forward and urge everyone an aye vote, and I yield back, sir.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentlelady from Washington.
I'd like to yield a minute to, or a few minutes to the gentleman from Oregon.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I thank my colleagues from Oregon and Washington for their work on this legislation, this amendment, bringing it forward. Look, this is extraordinarily important to men and women who work in the woods in the Northwest and across the United States. As you've heard, for nearly 4 decades, the Environmental Protection Agency said that driving down a forest road was not the same as pumping raw sewage into a river. They're much different activities. This amendment would prevent the federal government from subjecting forested communities and businesses to further costly permits for everyday activities like driving down a road. Rural forested communities in the Northwest have been hurting for a very long time. Those who live there, we know about all the high unemployment rates. We know about the high poverty rates. We know about the percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch because of burdensome federal regulations that have shut down activity on our federal forests. Now lawsuits threaten to do this on our private forests as well. The last thing we need is more costly and lawsuit-prone regulations that will further impact rural communities and the good people who live there that simply want the opportunity to work in the woods, raise their families, and grow their communities. Passing this bipartisan amendment will provide some certainty moving forward for rural forested communities, forest managers, and the people who work in the woods. So I urge my colleagues to stand for jobs, stand for rural America, and vote for this bipartisan amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
I'd like to yield in addition such time as the gentleman may consume.
I thank the gentlelady and simply want to note for the record that I support this amendment, this bipartisan amendment. We should all vote for it. Yield back.
All right.
Recognized.
With that, I urge my colleagues to join in this bipartisan, bicameral effort to protect jobs and protect our forest health, and I urge adoption. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Washington. If you favor the amendment, say aye. Aye. If you oppose, say no. Pending the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I have an amendment to desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report Number 113-117, offered by Ms. Fox of North Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, and a member opposed to the amendment will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment is one I've taken to calling the Spending Safeguard Amendment because it will protect taxpayers in the event CBO predictions related to the Farm Risk Management Election Program are horribly wrong. This particular program is basically an expansion of overly generous crop insurance subsidies for producers and is predicted to cost about $23 billion over 10 years, but it could potentially cost more, much more. That's because the program's costs are linked to high target price estimates that well exceed historical averages. If prices fall, taxpayers will be forced to make up the difference. As many of us are aware, the 2008 Farm Bill cost taxpayers 51% more than its drafters predicted. None of us, from members of Congress to the budget wizards at CBO, can predict the future. That is why we must put a safeguard in place to prevent unappropriated spending from eating taxpayers alive. My amendment will cap spending on this program at 110% of CBO predicted levels for the first 5 years in which payments are dispersed, fiscal years 2016 through 2020. If CBO predictions are reasonably accurate, nothing will happen. But if the predictions are horribly wrong, this amendment ensures taxpayers won't be forced to pay for another costly Washington mistake. This is a simple amendment, but one that I hope will set an important precedent. If Congress creates new mandatory spending programs, it must put a mechanism in place to make sure costs don't spiral out of control. As our national debt approaches $17 trillion, we simply can't afford to create new open-ended mandatory spending programs and set them on autopilot. When I talk to constituents about the federal budget, nearly all are puzzled by the concept of mandatory spending. Virtually no one of any political stripe can understand the idea of creating a law 1 year that imposes an unlimited, unchecked, unaccountable lien on the Treasury for all time. Even with all the hand-wringing over the discretionary spending reductions called for in sequestration, we all know that in the end, budgetary problems on the spending side of the ledger will never be resolved until we confront mandatory spending. My amendment quells all of the uncertainties created by mandatory spending with one beautifully simple proposal that, for the first time in the memory of everyone we've talked to, puts a finite number on an otherwise infinite liability. To be clear, this amendment applies only to one single provision, the Farm Risk Management Election Program. It does not apply to SNAP and will not affect food stamp benefits or other mandatory spending programs in any way. My amendment will safeguard taxpayers if the Farm Risk Management Election Program ends up costing significantly more than advertised, prevent automatic and unappropriated spending under this program from skyrocketing, and set a striking new precedent for fiscal responsibility. This amendment should pass with broad bipartisan bipartisan support, Mr. Chairman. Over the past few days, I've noticed that many of my Democratic colleagues share my concern about the uncertain budgetary impacts of this program. Republicans and Democrats alike should rally around this idea, which simultaneously protects taxpayers and ensures the fiscal viability of this program. The time has come to put an end to reckless, unchecked mandatory spending programs in the Farm Bill. This amendment may make those unaccustomed to the way things are done uncomfortable, but the simple truth is that the way things are done just doesn't work anymore. In fact, it never has. Congresses of old had no problem creating obligations for future generations to fulfill. Today, we have an opportunity to change course, to set things right, to take the first step toward reining in out-of-control mandatory spending. I urge my colleagues to take this step with me and support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reserve the balance of my time.
The lady reserves the balance of her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I might consume. I rise in strong opposition to this amendment and ask my colleagues to join me in rejecting it. I appreciate the intent of the General Lady's amendment, which is obviously to restrain federal spending. But being fiscally responsible has been my focus from the very beginning. That's why we brought forth a bill that cuts traditional farm spending by $23 billion. That's 36%. Over the last 17 years, farmers have received substantial fixed payments with 100% certainty. We eliminated those payments, replaced them with a risk management framework that provides support only when farmers face significant losses. Under this amendment, farmers would go from 100% guaranteed direct loans to a 100% guarantee that the safety net would fall short when they need it the most. I urge my colleagues to consider a few key points. Number one, we built restraint into the new farm policies. The reference prices are all below cost of production estimates. Farmers are only paid on 85% of their acres. In the case of the PLC, they're only paid on 90% of their yield. Total payments on a farm are capped at total historic program acres, ensuring that no new acres are added to the program. We have very binding payment limitations and reduced AGI limits. And if that weren't enough, the formulas that established assistance levels are constrained themselves. Second, the programs are designed to only turn on when they're needed. The assistance is provided directly in the proportion to need. We're no longer making payments for the sake of making payments. And even though it's incredibly unlikely, if spending levels were ever to reach 110% of CBO's projected spending levels, it would be so because there's been a catastrophic drop in the market. And the third and final point on this amendment, I say this respectfully, my dear friend, it'd be an absolute nightmare to administer. Now, some would say administering it is the administration's problem. But unlike a lot of legislation that flows through this town, every provision of this bill has undergone extensive technical review to ensure its ability to be implemented. Every crop is on its own marketing year, and every state has a slightly different growing season. Administering an overall program cap on a risk management tool that is designed to respond to unique risk management challenges is an incredibly challenging problem. We'll tie USDA in knots. I argue that there's a great discussion to have when we debate the technical merits of the Budget Act. But let's use newly reformed Farm Safety Net as a testing ground for, let's just not do that. Let's just not use it for this experiment. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, could I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
1 minute. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm really disappointed in the Chairman of the Agriculture Committee's response to this amendment. This is a really good amendment that will help us be able to predict in the future how much money is going to be spent. It will hold the CBO accountable. If the numbers presented to us are accurate, this will never hit. I believe the Chairman did not dispute my comments that the last Farm Bill went over budget 51%. We're constantly hearing that the CBO predicted something and comes in with a totally different number. If by any chance the CBO is wrong here, then the Chairman will do good work in getting us to understand why more money needs to be appropriated for these programs. But I applaud the chairman for what he's done, identifying problems and appropriate solutions, but this is a good amendment. It deserves to be passed. It has bipartisan support, and it will take us in the right direction. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire how much time I have left?
2.5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford, 2.5 minutes.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also rise respectfully in opposition to the gentlelady's amendment. My district, located in the Mississippi Delta region, grows nearly half of all rice produced in the United States. This amendment jeopardizes the safety net row crop producers in my district depend on to manage risk and stay in business. Given the fact that price volatility is the primary risk Mid-South farmers face and the cost of production is extremely high, the price loss coverage program is the only viable option to provide producers adequate protection. Leading experts and ag economists at Texas A&M University show that the average cost of production for rice is $14.92 per hundredweight. The $14 per hundredweight reference price established in the Farm Bill is realistic and would not kick in unless the producer experiences a loss. What's more, CBO projections already take into account the probability of price movements that can impact the overall cost projections of the PLC policy, and U.S. farm policy has come in well under budget projections for at least the last 7 years. This amendment is unnecessary and will do nothing but create more uncertainty for agriculture producers. The House Ag Committee has made a good faith bipartisan effort to craft a farm bill that reflects a farmer's risk and is fair across all regions of the country. This amendment is a step backwards. And with all due respect, I urge my colleagues to oppose the gentlelady's amendment. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from North Carolina. If you favor, you'll say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chair, on that I request a recorded vote.
To Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from North Carolina will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment 4, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For the purpose, what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment Number 4, printed in House Report Number 113-117, offered by Mr. Ellison of Minnesota.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison, and a member opposed will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my amendment is simple. It would simply ask us to learn more. It would ask us to know more than we know now about an important subject affecting our society and indeed our whole world. In fact, my amendment would simply require a study to review climate impacts of the price loss coverage program. Now, I can't understand why we wouldn't want to know the effects of such a program. And I think learning more so that we can do better is a good idea. Climate change is a defining issue of this century. It's negatively impacting our economy, our health, and security. There is an international consensus that climate change is real, is caused and influenced by mankind, and is affecting our world in a negative way. Decisions Congress makes on this day, Mr. Chairman, in this Farm Bill, in fact, will have a direct impact on greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And of course, this world doesn't know the borders that these nations do, so it'll affect the entire globe. Agriculture does contribute to climate change. In fact, 8% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. Agriculture also brings great gains to humanity as well. But we need to understand what greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture mean so that we can formulate better policy and utilize available technology. The emissions from agriculture result from fertilizer application, livestock, land use, soil management, farm equipment, and rice production. Now, the new price loss coverage program provides farmers raising major crops with subsidies if the crop prices drop below current historic levels. Farmers are already plowing up marginal lands and native grasslands in response to record crop prices and crop insurance subsidies. 23 million acres of natural land were plowed up between 2008 and 2011, and almost 20 million of these for corn, soybeans, and wheat alone. The price loss coverage program will further incentivize increased crop production. Now, converting land to cropland releases millions of tons of CO2 in the United States every year, and converting more land to agriculture will increase greenhouse gas emissions. But, Mr. Chairman, we don't know how much, we don't know the extent, we don't know the effects, and it's important that we do know so that we can incentivize more green-friendly agricultural production methods so that we can know the impact on our world and we can know why it's important to take action now in this farm bill today. So a study shouldn't harm anybody, and I urge support for this amendment.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I would simply say that I have the greatest of respect for my good colleague from Minnesota, but at the present time and the present set of circumstances, I must in good faith oppose his amendment. I believe he's very sincere in his efforts, but again, I must oppose his amendment, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves or yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
I'm prepared to vote. Well, I yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Minnesota. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 5, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment number 5, printed in House Report number 113-117, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my amendment would simply repeal the outdated and expensive dairy support law enacted as part of the Agriculture Act of 1949. This provision created a commodity support policy for dairy production that, though suspended upon enactment of each farm bill that has been reauthorized, it still remains on the books as permanent law. That this old law is still technically in effect is a problem for 2 reasons. First, the price support calculations essentially establish a floor for milk prices, which is set at twice the current market price. This means that the federal government would be required to step in and purchase surplus milk at double the current purchase price, which would also drive up costs for taxpayers, but also will result in a higher cost at the grocery store, potentially making a typical gallon of milk cost $7 a gallon. This will hurt the most vulnerable in our society, poor children and seniors on a limited income. This potential and likely unintended consequence is troubling. But more troubling is that this old law threatens to rear its ugly head every time the Farm Bill expires before it is reauthorized. In fact, we faced this very issue at the beginning of this year, though it was buried in the larger fiscal cliff deal that passed on January the 1st. Mr. Chairman, in this time of congressional gridlock, we've seen bailouts, failed stimulus bills, near government shutdowns, and panic about sequestration and tax hikes. The last thing we need is one more cliff for Americans to fall off of. This law is outdated, it is unused, and ultimately a nuisance, which requires a patch every time Congress fails to renew the larger Farm Bill, which unfortunately is a frequent occurrence. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from Minnesota 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and you know, when I was chairman and did the last farm bill, we maintained the permanent law, and we did it for a reason, and that is it's very hard to get these farm bills done, and sometimes you need some motivation to get people to move, and that's the main reason why we left it there. I guess I have a question if it's of the author of the amendment, if he would be willing to engage me in a discussion here. I guess I was just curious why you're only repealing the dairy provision of the permanent law and not the entire permanent law. I guess, is there some reason for that?
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
Certainly. The reason for that is because the milk